Ashley looked at me and said, "We don't need you this Christmas," her voice cutting through the cheerful noise behind her, and in that instant the cold outside felt lighter than her words. At first, I thought she was joking because families tease, but her expression made it clear she wasn't, and it felt like being pushed out while the house sparkled with holiday cheer. I had spent the entire day treating this night like a chance to belong again, polishing my old silverware until it shone, baking cranberry bread my son loved as a child, and letting the kitchen fill with familiar, comforting smells. I carefully wrapped every gift, spending nearly all my social security money on perfume for Ashley and a leather belt for my son, convincing myself it was worth it just to be included. Before leaving, I paused in front of my mirror, pinned my late husband's gold leaf brooch to my coat, and carried that small piece of love with me as I stepped into a moment I never expected. The brooch felt like protection, a quiet reminder of a love that had once been steady and safe, as I called a cab and double-checked that I had the gifts, the bread, and my gloves before stepping into the snow. Thick flakes fell while the driver softly hummed Christmas songs, and I practiced my words in my head, telling myself how thankful and proud I felt, not realizing I was speaking only to myself. When we arrived, their house shone brightly from every window, laughter spilling out into the night as I paused on the sidewalk watching people move inside, relatives and strangers all wrapped in warmth, and I truly believed I belonged there too. My hands shook as I rang the bell, and Ashley opened the door with a wine glass in hand, her red dress glittering, her face empty of warmth as she said my name without a smile and didn't step aside. I moved forward on my own, her expensive perfume hanging heavily in the air as the house filled my senses with food, pine, and flowers, laughter echoing from the dining room, and somewhere among it all I heard Matthew's voice, cheerful and alive, yet he never came to see me. Ashley waved toward the kitchen and told me to wait there because dinner wasn't ready and they were busy, and while the words sounded polite enough, her tone made me feel like a problem she didn't want to deal with. I carried my gifts inside and placed them carefully on the counter beside untouched snacks, then sat at the small table by the window, folding my hands to keep them steady as the sounds of celebration buzzed just out of reach. Each burst of laughter from the dining room felt like being shut out again and again, and I kept telling myself she was just stressed, that it wasn't personal, but when I offered to help, she didn't even look at me and told me to sit because I'd only get in the way. The sharp clink of her bracelets as she chopped vegetables filled the space between us, and I couldn't help remembering the years when I was the one cooking and creating that same warmth. Time passed, dinner was announced, chairs moved, voices rose, and still no one called for me, so after waiting a moment, I straightened my coat and stood, hoping they had simply forgotten and that I only needed to remind them I was there. When I stepped into the dining room, the noise stopped at once and every face turned toward me as Ashley's smile froze and she loudly asked what I was doing there, while soft music still played in the background. I tried to smile and said I thought we were eating together, but she laughed in a light, cutting way and reminded me she told me to stay in the kitchen because this was a family dinner, as people around the table nodded awkwardly and said they didn't want any tension. My voice shook as I said I only wanted to sit with my son, but Ashley repeated the word son slowly and said he was fine, everyone was fine, but I brought the mood down and people could feel it. The room felt smaller as Matthew glanced at me and then looked away, silently asking me not to cause trouble, and when I whispered his name, he softly said it might be best if I left. Something inside me broke as I thought of the money I spent, the bread I baked, and how much this night meant to me, but I couldn't speak. Ashley moved closer and warned me not to make it harder, then loudly blamed me for ruining Christmas before gripping my arm and guiding me to the door as the music grew louder behind us. Cold air hit my face when she opened it. She said good night without warmth, and closed the door, leaving me on the porch as snow melted on my cheeks while, through the window, I watched the warm glow inside and realized I no longer belonged there. I stood there for a long time, clutching the gifts to my chest as laughter drifted through the door and slowly turned into something distant and unreal, and in the quiet street under falling snow, I finally understood that I no longer belonged to that family, if I ever truly had. I knocked softly at first, then harder, my hands burning from the cold as snow settled on my sleeves and warm light still glowed behind the curtains, but no one came. I called out to Matthew, asking him to let me in for just a few minutes, yet the house stayed silent except for faint laughter that cut through the night. With shaking hands, I called his phone, and when he answered, sounding distracted and annoyed, I begged him to open the door because I was freezing, but after pause and more laughter in the background, he told me it was better if I went home because Ashley was upset. I begged him, telling him how cold it was and that I didn't have my cab keys, asking for just a few minutes, and for a moment there was a pause that gave me hope before he sighed and told me not to make a scene because it was Christmas Eve. Then the call ended. I stood there staring at my phone as snow thickened around me, settling into my hair and soaking my coat, and when I tried calling again and again with no answer, I saw my reflection on the dark screen, an older woman with tears freezing on her face. I slid down against the wall by the door, gripping my coat as the cold crept through my shoes, my gloves, and deep into my bones, while inside the house laughter faded into cheerful music, a reminder of a life that no longer included me. Memories came rushing back of nights I stayed by Matthew's bed when he was sick, how he once clung to my hand during storms, how I had been his comfort and safety, and now he was just steps away choosing not to hear me. My fingers went numb and stiff, my thoughts slowed, and when a car passed and disappeared into the dark, I tried to stand but my knees gave out, leaving me heavy and helpless in the cold as my body no longer seemed to belong to me. I leaned against the wall and looked up at the window where soft light still glowed behind the curtains, knowing they were eating and laughing, maybe even opening gifts, and I wondered if I had already been forgotten or erased completely. Time lost its shape as I drifted in and out, the world growing distant while snow settled on my shoes, my coat, and my hair, my breathing slowing as the cold took hold. When I tried to move again, sharp pain shot through my legs, my head fell back against the wall, and my eyes closed as their voices faded into a low hum, the last thing I remember being a quiet whisper of Matthew's name, barely more than a thought carried into the cold. When I opened my eyes, everything was bright and humming, lights overhead, machines beeping, and the clean smell of disinfectant in the air as a nurse smiled and told me I was lucky, that I had severe hypothermia and another hour outside could have ended everything. My throat dry, I asked who found me, and she said a neighbor discovered me early that morning and called an ambulance just in time, then tucked the blankets around me and told me to rest because I was safe now. The word safe felt foreign as I turned toward the gray winter light seeping through the window and glanced at my phone on the bedside table, empty of calls or messages. The nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, leaving me with a hollow emptiness rather than anger, because Matthew knew what he had done and chose not to come, which hurt more than anything he could have said. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the last time I'd felt truly loved, realizing it had been years, maybe since my husband was alive, and finally understanding that love should never be something you freeze waiting for. Back in my apartment after the hospital, the quiet was heavier than any noise I had known, the clock ticking steadily as if reminding me I was still here, still waiting for something that would never come. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone with no messages, no missed calls, hoping maybe Matthew had finally realized what he'd done, typing and erasing words again and again, wanting to reach out, but the screen stayed blank, leaving me to sit alone in the silence. I almost died out there. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the send button, but I deleted the message because what was the point? He knew I'd been out in the cold and still said nothing. When I walked back into the apartment, it still held the fading scent of the lavender candle I'd lit before leaving on Christmas Eve, now reduced to a hardened layer of wax. The room felt unfamiliar, like I was stepping into someone else's life. I took off my coat, still stiff with frost, hung it by the door, and quietly said, "Never again." The next morning, Grace Miller showed up, pushed her way inside before I even opened the door fully, her face flushed with anger and worry as she set groceries on the counter. She told me she'd gone to Matthew's house and his wife said I had overreacted, the same word Ashley threw at me while pushing me toward the cold, and it hit something sharp inside me. Grace paced, her voice rising, but it all felt distant as my chest tightened and I sank into a chair. She stopped, knelt beside me, apologized, and asked how people could be so ungrateful. I couldn't speak at first, then finally whispered, "Grace, please don't go back to them. I don't want their names in this house today." She looked confused, insisting they owed me an apology, but I just needed space. "They won't give it," I said quietly. "And I'm done waiting." Grace's anger faded and her shoulders relaxed as she unpacked the groceries, milk, bread, a small roast, then squeezed my hand and told me I was stronger than they realized. When she left, the apartment felt quieter, but it finally felt like it belonged to me again. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling between my hands while snow fell steadily outside. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and stared at the numbers. $200 every month toward Matthew's mortgage, $50 for each grandchild savings, money I gave to feel needed, to feel connected. My cursor hovered over the autopay button as Ashley's voice echoed in my memory, sharp and cold. Don't ruin our Christmas with your sad stories. I thought about everything I'd sacrificed. Paying for Matthew's college, working double shifts after my husband died, giving until giving became the only way I knew how to exist, and how somehow that made it easier for them to discard me. My hand shook as I clicked cancel payment, and when the confirmation window asked if I was sure, I clicked yes. The action completed, and it felt like severing a cord I'd been tied to for years. As soon as I closed the laptop, something inside me loosened. Not a break, just a quiet release, and tears rolled down my cheeks, warm at first, then cooling as they fell. They weren't only about last night, they were for years of being overlooked, for sacrifices no one remembered, for all the ways I made life easier for others while neglecting myself. I remembered my father telling me as a child that I was too soft to survive alone, and how I spent my entire life proving him wrong, yet here I was at 72 still hoping for crumbs of affection from people who only saw me when they needed something. I stood at the window, watching snow swirl beneath the streetlight like tiny shards in the dark, and somewhere out there Matthew was likely asleep, unaware, or uninterested, that his mother had finally stopped being his safety net. I could have shouted, demanded answers, but I chose silence instead, because sometimes quiet speaks louder than anything else. I made another cup of tea, and for the first time in years it tasted like actual comfort instead of routine, and the apartment felt different, no longer something I floated through, but something that belonged to me. Before bed, I watched the snow's reflection dance across the walls and heard Grace's voice in my mind, "You're stronger than they know." She was right, but my strength didn't come from confronting them, it came from finally choosing myself. Because I finally stopped bending. I got into bed, listened to the wind against the window and the soft ticking of the clock, and whispered, "You can't take from me anymore," and for the first time in years I slept through the night. The pain didn't disappear, but it shifted, like something inside me finally turned toward a different path. The world outside was still cold, but inside I felt a small, steady peace I hadn't known in so long. A week later, while folding laundry, my phone buzzed with a message, "Mom, can we talk soon?" My heart thudded, but I didn't answer. I needed to know if talk meant owning up to their actions or just another attempt to pull me back with guilt. 2 hours later came another message, Ashley's upset. "She thinks you're ignoring us." The word upset stung, as if she was the injured one after everything she'd done, and I could almost hear her voice, sharp and self-pitying, but instead of reacting I set the phone down, finished folding the towels, and turned it off because silence felt safer than explaining myself to people who stopped caring long ago. The days that followed were soft and ordinary in a way that felt new. I made coffee, watched snow slide down the windows, walked a little, talked with Grace, even started reading again, noticing how much guilt had filled my life until it finally loosened its grip. But peace rarely lasts when others rely on your sacrifice to stay comfortable, and one cold afternoon Grace arrived with concern on her face and said quietly, "Illa, they're talking about you. Ashley told someone at the store that you stopped paying their mortgage out of spite," Grace said, and I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Spite?" I repeated, thinking about how I paid for nearly 2 years without being asked, and now stopping suddenly made me the villain. Grace shook her head, frustrated, saying they were calling me unstable and claiming Christmas didn't happen the way I said it did, and for a moment my breath stalled as I heard Ashley's voice in my memory, smooth, practiced, convincing to anyone who didn't know her. I didn't do anything wrong. Elaine just takes things the wrong way. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd cancel the payments, my stomach tightening, and whispered. The cruelest part is they act like I'm the problem just because. I finally stopped helping. Grace took my hand and told me I did the right thing, and I wanted to believe her, but later that night, after I crawled into bed, my phone lit up with another message. You're hurting the kids by cutting us off. They don't understand why Grandma won't help anymore. I read it over and over until the words blurred, realizing they were using the children now, my grandchildren, to dig into the old wounds. Guilt tried to slip back in, but then I remembered the cold porch, Ashley's frozen stare, the locked door, and how she didn't think about the kids when she threw their grandmother outside. I turned off the phone without responding. I didn't owe them excuses anymore. Even so, sleep came slow, the quiet filled with memories I never asked to remember. I could almost hear my husband's steady, kind voice reminding me, you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed, words he'd said years ago when Matthew first began drifting away. I hadn't listened then, Believing family meant staying no matter how much it hurt. Now I was learning that sometimes leaving is the only way to stay whole. The next morning, I walked to the cafe down the street, where the owner always saved me a seat by the window. As I sipped my coffee and watched strangers pass, I realized I didn't need them anymore. Not their approval, their guilt, or their ideas of who I should be. For years, I'd held up the structure of their lives with my silence, and the moment I stepped away, cracks began to appear, not in me, but in the foundation they'd built on my back. Later, Grace came by, telling me she'd run into Matthew in town. He looked awful, behind on bills, scared, she said. For a split second, I felt the old motherly instinct to step in and fix it, but then I remembered the hospital bed, the empty silence of my phone, his voice saying, "Go home, Mom. We'll talk tomorrow, and then, nothing." I looked at Grace and said, "I hope they figure it out." She studied me carefully. "You mean that, don't you?" "I do," I said. "I hope they learn what it feels like to stand on their own. Maybe then they'll understand what I've done for them." That night, I placed my phone on the counter and turned it off. The apartment hummed softly with the heater, quiet and mine. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for an apology or a message or permission to feel hurt. The silence didn't ache anymore. It felt like balance, quiet, simple, and finally mine. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving the city in a soft white glow, and when I woke the apartment felt calm with no buzzing phone or harsh words lingering. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched my breath fog the glass, surprised by the peace I felt, a kind I never thought I'd find again. Then I noticed an envelope slipped under my door, written in neat handwriting, and inside was a letter from a nurse named Jennifer who said I reminded her of her mother, that I inspired her to apply to nursing school, and she started classes next week. She thanked me for kindness I didn't even realize I'd shown. I held the letter for a long time, feeling warmth I hadn't felt in months, realizing how one genuine thank you from a stranger could mean more than years of unspoken gratitude from my own family. I folded the letter and set it beside my husband's old brooch. Later, my phone buzzed and after a moment of hesitation, I checked it. It was from Matthew. Mom, Ashley says we should move past this. Come for dinner tomorrow. The kids miss you. I stared at the words. Move past this. As if it was some small misunderstanding, as if it wasn't the night they locked me outside in the freezing cold or the days of silence that followed while I lay in a hospital bed, the message read like Ashley's voice. Smooth, tidy, calculated. Come for dinner. The same woman who once accused me of ruining her Christmas now wanted me at her table, but when I read the message again, my hands didn't shake and there was no burst of anger, only clarity. I knew exactly how it would go. Forced apologies, tight smiles, a performance to ease their guilt, not mine, and I'd leave feeling smaller than before. They didn't miss me, they missed what I gave: money, favors, comfort, softness, forgiveness on demand. I looked around my apartment at the framed photos and the quiet light and knew I didn't want to return, not even for the children, because going back would teach them that cruelty can be undone by convenience and that I would always come when called no matter how I was treated. I couldn't do that anymore, not to them and not to myself. The sun broke through the clouds, sparkling over the snow outside, and I put on my coat and stepped into the cold, the air sharp and clean in my lungs as I walked to the small park nearby. The bare trees stood like black lines against the sky, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking toward myself. I sat on a bench and watched a mother pull her child on a sled, their laughter lifting into the stillness, and I smiled, not with longing or regret, but with steady acceptance, knowing life would continue, and so would I. When I got home, I placed Jennifer's letter in a small wooden box with my most treasured things: old photographs, a 10th birthday card from Matthew, a pressed flower from my husband's garden, keeping it as a reminder that kindness can return, even from unexpected places. I made a simple dinner of soup and bread, turned on the small lamp beside my chair, and let its warm glow fill me. My phone lit up again, another message from Matthew, a single word meant to tug at me, but I stared at it for a long moment before setting it face down. I didn't block him or delete it, I just chose not to answer. Night settled softly around me, and I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the stillness and warmth sink in. For years, I thought forgiveness meant returning to the people who hurt me, but now I understood it meant letting go. Quietly, I whispered to the empty room. Rejection isn't hate. It's love turned inward. The strength in my own voice surprised me. I walked to the window, watching the snow reflect the streetlights like scattered stars, and realized I wasn't alone. I was free. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd reach this place. Stronger, lighter, untouched by those who once defined me. Yet here I was, still standing, still warm, and if my story ever reaches someone who's been pushed aside, forgotten, or made to feel small, I hope they hear this. Sometimes the greatest revenge is peace. When you stop chasing the love that wounds you, you make room for the love that heals you, and if you've had to walk alone to find it, walk proud.